Well, Jim, thank you so much for being here today with us. The last time you were at the University of Washington, you spoke a lot about the importance of providing financial resources to the permanent participants so they could participate in Arctic Council meetings. Recently, you launched the Alga Fund that provides some financial resources. Could you tell us a little bit about the fund and how that works?
That's a great question. Thanks, Ian, and thanks to everybody for the opportunity to come and talk about some of these issues that are really important to us. And thanks, Erica, also for mentioning that I am the inaugural chair of the Alga Fund. So a bit of context. If you look at the founding documents of the Arctic Council, the Ottawa Declaration, and every declaration that's taken place since then, every 2 years since 1996, every declaration mentions finding ways to better support the work of the permanent participants in the Arctic Council. Well, that's a genuine sentiment, but acting on that sentiment is difficult, and we've discovered that over the years. We need to think of new and different ways to approach this. Now, all 6 of the permanent participants have relationships with the governments of the countries in which they reside. And those are important relationships, and we couldn't do what we do without those relationships. But what we found is that those relationships and the resources they provide tend to be inconsistent from year to year. And that makes it difficult for us to participate at the same level, but also to plan and think strategically, because we simply don't know what the next year will bring. And so the idea for the Alga Fund was really formulated about 4 years ago. But it's based on concepts that have been developed over a much longer period of time about a fund to support the work of the permanent participants directly. And I should mention that Alga, and my pronunciation is undoubtedly wrong because I'm not Sami. Alga is a Sami word that means beginning, and so the idea behind this is that it's a new beginning for the permanent participants. The idea of Alga Fund is simply to produce an endowment, so a fund that contains enough resources for us essentially to provide parts of the interest that it raises. And as an endowment, that means that it is consistent from year to year, and it does allow us to plan strategically. Alga Fund is really simple. It's established in Sweden as a host country as a charitable foundation. Alga Fund can accept contributions from any country in any currency. Each of those contributions is very transparent in that you see who made it, the amounts that they made, and then those contributions are distributed equally to the permanent participants. And I should mention that Alga Fund was developed by all 6 permanent participants working together. Alga Fund initially will be fundraising to fund the endowment. And so there won't be distributions to the PPs right away. It'll take a bit of time to raise the endowment, and then, as I said, really what we will then distribute will be earnings from the endowment. And I should also say that the initial focus of the Alga Fund will be on observers to the Arctic Council, and there's a simple reason for that, because observer countries and organizations, part of the criteria for being an observer in the Arctic Council is demonstrating a political willingness and a financial ability to support the work of the permanent participants. And so really what we're doing is, A, looking for a way to work more directly with observers in a very simple way. And I'll talk about other ways we work with observers perhaps later. But also, this allows observers to fulfill the criteria for observer status that involves supporting the permanent participants in a very simple and, again, transparent way. And I should also say, I think in closing, that we also recognize that there may be organizations whose mandate makes it difficult for them to provide sort of unrestricted support. That is what we're looking for initially with Alga Fund. And so what we want to also be able to provide is a mechanism for those organizations to provide support in, say, for instance, thematic areas. So for instance, if an organization wants to provide support for the permanent participants to work on marine issues, we hope to fund a second mechanism that would allow project-related funding to be obtained for the PPs, and that would be managed through the Alga Fund Board of Directors. Permanent participants would apply for funding in various thematic areas by providing proposals. The board would then vet and evaluate those proposals and provide funding to PPs who are able to take advantage of the availability of those funds. So Alga Fund will eventually be two things, but initially we're focusing on the general support side, and then we will move to the project side. And we're really hopeful that this is a mechanism to take sort of matters a bit more into our own hands, and hopefully to get this sort of consistent funding that will allow us to plan longer into the future.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
Well, speaking of projects, what I'd like to talk about is some of the rural Arctic communities right now, and how a lot of them are lacking social and environmental data, really that can be utilized to help make local governance decisions. And I know you've been involved with a lot of these monitoring, community-based monitoring programs that are being set up to kind of help collect this data. How do you think these are going to benefit some of the Arctic communities and also sort of the maritime sector at the same time?
And that's a great question. And I have to say, David, I like how you put that, because you said the Arctic rural communities lack social and environmental data. And I would not put it that way. I would say Arctic communities have a wealth of social and environmental data. The problem that we run into is how to get that data, A, to the people who need it for making governance decisions, and B, getting it in a form that is acceptable to those institutions. That's the thing we really struggle with. The data is there, the knowledge is there, but how do you overcome those two hurdles? And so one of the things that we've discovered is that you can take data and information from communities in such a way that it's scientifically justifiable. And so in other words, the argument we oftentimes run into with traditional knowledge or with data gathered at a community level is that it can be considered anecdotal, and not able to be included with data gathered in other means. And so, but we think that it's entirely possible to gather traditional knowledge and community observations in a way that allows them to be essentially accumulated with other scientific data. And so, let me give you some examples. We worked a lot on community-based monitoring of subsistence activities. Well, when you start looking, particularly in our region at subsistence, you're talking about activities in the marine environment, because we are a region of islands and coastline and maritime activities. And so what that means is that in addition to gathering data about what people are hunting and fishing for, we're gathering a lot of information about what people observe when they're out on the water. And so, and not only that, but also people's observations of the environment. And then what that allows us to do is to compare those observations to people's knowledge about the past. And so in a way, we're developing a time series of information that is really valuable, because it's very difficult, expensive, time-consuming to gather this information in any other way. And so these contributions are valuable. The data is there. It's just a matter of how to get it to the decision makers. And I would say, let me give you one really solid example of how this has all worked. And some of you who are familiar with the Aleutians might remember that in 2004 there was a very devastating ship accident. The Selendang Ayu broke up close to Unalaska, one of the busiest shipping ports and fishing ports in the country. And the Selendang Ayu spilled over 300,000 gallons of heavy fuel oil into the environment. It closed the tanner crab fishery for the entire season. It was the second largest oil spill in Alaska history. But the good that came out of the Selendang Ayu incident was that the insurance funded a Aleutian Islands risk assessment. And the Aleutian Islands risk assessment drew heavily on the data and information of local communities. The Aleutian Islands risk assessment led directly to areas to be avoided in the Aleutian Islands being designated in the International Maritime Organization, and those took effect just less than a year ago. Those areas to be avoided came about because of community involvement and community interest in what was the outcome of this was going to be. And the resources were provided by a terrible accident, but the resources needed to do these things are there in a lot of other ways too. And this demonstrates that it can really work. And so we are chipping away at that in a lot of ways in a variety of projects. And I would say that in conclusion to the question, I would say that the data is important, of course, but the other thing that comes from community involvement in these activities is community empowerment, because the community then, of course, can take a hold of that data and have ownership of it and use it in a variety of ways that we never even consider. So, your initial question might be about ship traffic through the subsistence use area, but then it can be extended into so many other places that you wouldn't know if you didn't have the community involved to begin with. So, obviously, we're very high on this concept, and we continue to try to figure out ways to make it work better and to apply to more and a broader suite of issues.
Right.
Yeah.
It's nice to see that local participation has a big international impact.
It absolutely can, and we see more and more examples of it all the time.
Great. Well, thank you.
You bet.
So, hi, Jim.
Hey, Jake.
So my question is also with a project, but it gets a bit more specific. So coming from South Korea, I've always been interested in how South Korean government interacts with the permanent participants in the Arctic. And currently, the Korean Maritime Institute under South Korean government is collaborating with the Aleut International Association on a project called Arctic Marine Indigenous Use Mapping, which is the first joint project directly led by permanent participant and an Arctic observer state in the Arctic Council. So could you share a little bit about what the project is and how has having a direct partnership with South Korea, which is an Arctic observer state in the Arctic Council, has been effective in building the project?
That's a great question, and so it's also good because it takes our previous discussion and takes it down to the project level. And so let me say that the project that Jaquan is asking about is one that has been going on for a couple of years. And the way this project came about was very organic, and I think it's a great example of how the Arctic Council works at its best. AIA, of course, because of the region we live in, the ocean and maritime issues that are being of such high importance to us, one of the working groups of the Arctic Council that we have been involved with since our inception has been PAIM, the Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment. And so we had this idea to take some of our community-based monitoring activities and map the information that we obtain from them. Maps can be really powerful tools, and of course, there's drawbacks to maps. They're static. They're a snapshot in time, but they also are really good for telling a story. So we've been really working hard on how to map activities in the marine environment, and we developed a project around that really looks at the mapping, but more importantly, the techniques to produce these maps. And we really wanted to develop a tool that would allow communities to produce their own maps. And not only to produce the maps, but to have a methodology that could also go along with the maps themselves and make them scientifically justifiable so that you could use them in a regional governance context. You could use them in a legal context. You could use them in a variety of contexts where you not only need the map, but you need the methodology that produced the map. So how to develop this tool? Well, we presented this project to PAIM, and a couple of presentations went on, and the representative of the Korean government to PAIM has become a pretty good friend, Justin Kim from KMI, from the Korean Maritime Institute. And one time, literally at dinner, Justin says to me, this project that you're working on is interesting. We're also working on marine use mapping techniques. Why don't we get our heads together and try to figure out how we might work together on this? So literally over this dinner conversation, 3 trips to Busan later, I've been to Busan 3 times now, I've met with the director of KMI, and we've had a couple of visits from KMI to Alaska to work on the techniques and how our information is going to be exchanged. We're doing data gathering on the project in the Aleutians right now, and a sister project is being developed in South Korea that will happen at the same time. When we're done, we'll be able to look at the 2 maps, the 2 projects, compare the results, and really, this is a tremendous opportunity in a couple of ways. One, KMI is providing part of the funding for the project, so that's important, of course, because we need resources in order to do something like this. But also KMI is providing expertise and technical information that allows us to have a broader reach in terms of the technologies and techniques that we're able to use. That it would be really difficult for us to do without a technical partner like KMI that has so much resources in this area. But then the other thing about it that's really outstanding and interesting is that, as Jay Kwan mentioned, this is the first time this has happened in the Arctic Council, where a permanent participant and an observer have come together to lead a project in a working group of the Arctic Council. And that's really exciting because it shows that, A, this can work, and B, that it can arise in a very organic way. You know, this is beneficial for KMI in Korea, of course, because it's part of their obligation as observers, you know, to support the work of the PPs. But it didn't come from that. It came from a shared interest in a particular topic, and that's what makes it really, really interesting to us, because it's not them offering to help us in order to check a box. It's them offering to help us and also get information from us, because we can test techniques that they're using in small communities in Alaska and potentially other Arctic countries as well. And so the opportunity for this collaboration, which benefits both, that's the way it's supposed to work. And again, this is the first time it's happening. It's the model, and we really want to see it happen more and more. And I think the things we're learning will really help other permanent participants that end up working directly with observers. And I should also mention that, of course, observers have been very involved in the work of the Arctic Council. They've helped to fund projects. They've developed projects. They've provided a lot of input into the working groups. But this is the first time that it's happened directly between a PP and an observer in terms of leading a project, and that's really significant. And so it's something we'd like to see happen more and more. And in a way, what we're seeing happen here ties all three questions together, because question one was about resources and how we find them and what we need them for. And question two was about the things that we can accomplish if we work in the communities and have enough resources to do so. And now we're talking about a really specific example about how we're doing a very specific thing with those resources and with and working within a community. Mm-hmm. And so you can sort of see how it all ties together. The PPs are they're conduits. You know, we work at the community level, but we also work at the international level between governments. And so information flow both directions is really important, and we need support from a variety of locations, both in our communities, but also from governments that we work with. And if that's the way it works the best, if information flows in both directions. So thanks,
Jim,
Jay.
I think that's all the time we have, so thank you very much.
Oh, you bet. Thank you. Thanks, guys.